Hello and welcome to another episode of the Society Builder podcast. Today we are going to be talking about education, and the four main things we're going to talk about are the Prussian education model, the subjects that should be taught in school, and the idea of having school choice and what that would mean to create a competitive landscape in schools so that you could be less indoctrinated. So, to start, will you explain the Prussian education model and its prevalence in modern society?
Sure. In brief, so in Prussia, the idea was to make education more streamlined, more like a factory, to generate a product. That product would be more or less workers and soldiers. You want to get the kind of education necessary to accomplish tasks, but not necessarily a bunch of free thinking individuals. You don't want a lot of those because then you can't have a cohesive workforce or military force. So education was pared down. You start having things like an assembly line where um, you have things as they are now in most schools, where you have an hour for this, an hour for that, an hour for that, and it's very regimented. It's on a bell system or like a whistle system where you only work at math or on math at this time period. The whistle blows or the bell rings, and you stop that. You move on to the next thing, and everything is very fragmented, but it's also regimented, and it's also you move through a course based on your age or your time spent, not mastery. So you've been in math for 1 year and you passed, you go to the next year. Um, and even if you don't pass, we just need to remediate you to where you need to do for the next one. So it's regimented. It's like very mechanical, and it's not built to make free thinkers. It's not really the liberal arts to free your mind. It's to get you able to follow orders.
So, I guess the first question that I would have that kind of goes along with it is what could you imagine a society that has a bunch of free thinkers or at least people who are further along and more educated? What would actually happen? Because I have been in situations where you have two free thinkers who vehemently disagree, and then you really aren't able to have people fall in line as much. So I mean,
Well, I guess the question is why do people have to fall in line? I mean, for what purpose, toward what goal? Um, if it's a big if, you have more, as we say, free thinkers, and we're going to use that term, like people who are educated how to think, not simply to be indoctrinated. The onus falls on, let's say, you to convince me and persuade me. And I'm not simply a filterless sponge. I'm asking you questions. I'm forcing you to prove your point. You have to bring me to your side, and you can't coerce me, or at least you shouldn't. Versus something like indoctrination, I'm just taught, well, you're in charge. You say A, all right, let's do it. And mine is not to reason why, mine is but to do and die. So it's maybe more efficient for a whole society to be very regimented and drone like, but it's not good. Um, you can convince a lot of people to do things. Like I mean, there's cases you can make, but where free thinking, I mean, that might not be the best term, but a citizenry that's free thinking, you have to convince them. It might take longer to get somewhere, but when you convince a person, they're there. Versus like you talk good, so I listen. Well, all it takes is for somebody else to talk better or to talk more entertainment or offer you more, pleasure, and you'll
that's
go to that person. So it's whim and well, this feels good versus this seems right or this seems good. This seems like the right or true course of action, and you have to get me there. It's not as quick, but it's more rooted and more foundational. And a populace is not so easily swayed by flashiness or funny words or entertainment or pleasure or whatever else.
yeah. And then my next question would be, how, as a teacher, how much further do you think you could get students if they all were trained at their level, like you said, to mastery? So someone who is more intelligent would be able to go further, obviously, because they would master things quicker. But do you think it would be significant from today's model if kids were like the kids who were really smart were pushed, and maybe the kids who didn't master things as quickly? Because obviously, there's in kindergarten, there's horses, monkeys, and lions, high, medium, and low. But
Well, okay, but that assumes that only smart is, or that's all it takes. I don't think that's all it takes. there are people who are very intelligent who can understand a lot if they wanted to, but they don't want to, right? There has to be a desire. There are people who are naturally intelligent that they can sit in a classroom and just absorb and ace your test. At some point in their life, though, they'll reach a point where that's not enough and they don't know how to work. And they hit this wall, and many of them will really struggle. On the other hand, there are kids who are moderately smart. I mean, they really don't absorb anything easily, but they know how to work hard and they can overcome those obstacles and get way further than the naturally smart kid. I don't think it's just intelligence. I think it's desire and interest and motivation and being reasonable about your path in life. If you're saying I just want to go, like there's a student that just graduated. He has a landscaping and snowplow business. He's been running that for 3 years as a high school student. Now, should he learn literature and logic and history and all those things? Yes, he should, but as leisure, as personal growth, not I'm stuck here. Um, I think a person who is naturally intelligent who says this is not what I want to do, at least I don't want to be required to do it. Okay. I think there has to be a point where a person has a lot of freedom to choose. I think mandatory education is wrong up to a point. But if everybody had the drive to learn, whether that's intrinsically, I just want to learn and grow as a person, or I want, I don't know, a certain kind of job or a certain outcome, or I want that diploma, or whatever it is external, I'm willing to get through it. I'm willing to put in the work. I think if students knew that you had to work and you don't have to be here, I think that would change the scope of education overall. That the students who didn't want to be here for any reason would have the freedom to leave after some grade, like the 10th grade or something. Those who wanted to stay had the drive and the always the option of leaving. You could go further, not simply in depth, but in breadth. You could say, like, we're going to learn history. You could do like the over scope of American history, let's say. You could focus on a certain event or time period, or just one thing. Like you could do, I mean, super depth on the Battle of Gettysburg and see it from multiple angles and go super deep. And it's not just learning the facts and data, it's learning how to learn about something, how to learn in the broad stroke, how to learn in depth, and then say, now that you graduated or you moved on, or you don't want to be in school anymore, you want to go learn on your own, you have the skill sets to learn breadth and depth and focus, and whether that's online or reading books or talking to people or whatever, and that you're you're enabled to learn, not simply I pass a test and I don't need to know anything else ever again.
Yeah, so you kind of hinted on it, and it kind of is going into our second topic. But what age do you think should be mandatory, or what skills should be mandatory, and at what age do you think you should kind of be free to choose, or what kind of would come down to it?
Personally, I'm conflicted about a lot of things regarding that. I think government mandatory is almost always wrong. I mean, there's probably some examples of where it's a good thing, but I just think once you do that, it doesn't meet everybody's needs. On the one hand, if you have to have some amount of mandatory education, I think, in my own opinion, it goes up to something like the 10th grade. Because at that point, a person can usually drive, or they're almost about to be able to drive. They're maturing. Their body is strong to do manual labor if that's what they want to do. They have a mind that is still growing if they want to do more academic things. I think at that point, the student is more able to make a choice. Now, the parents might have a lot to say. The parent might say, yeah, you don't want to go to school, but as a mom, dad, you will go to school. Fine, then that's on the parent, not the government, not school. But it, on the other hand, right, where I'm conflicted is, what if there was no mandatory school at all? I know the fear is, well, then nobody would go. Well, okay, like, okay, what's the consequence there? Would there be some people who say, I don't have to go at all? Okay, I want to go have fun and play video games all day. Yeah, but there are consequences. Freedom is, it
Built on
requires,
responsibility.
yeah, it's built on responsibility, or it requires it. Freedom has a consequence if you're not responsible, right? So you say, like my kids, if I knew that schooling was not required at all, I would still educate them or make sure they get educated somehow because I see the value in this. Because I know long term there's consequences to I don't know being able to read, being able to do math, being able to express yourself, being able to learn from a book or from videos or on your own or make things. So I think in the best of all scenarios, there'd be no mandatory education at all. But there would still be schools. But because it's not mandatory, schools can be not just selective in who they let in, but they can also not hinder the students who are there by requiring a bunch of people to be there who don't want to be there, whether they be in 11th grade or first grade. If Timmy is just a nightmare and he is a problem for everybody else in the room for some reason or another, hey, guess what? We're not going to have him here anymore. Now, maybe somebody else says, I have a special school for Timmy because it's for kids with a lot of emotional issues or hyper intelligent and bored or very low intelligent and frustrated and violent, like whatever. You could always meet the needs of people, but it's much more of a free market system than it is a government run one. But that's what could a school do if whatever. But back to your question, when should a mandatory end? If there has to be a mandatory, somewhere around 10th grade or like 15 years old, 16 years old, something like
Yeah.
that.
I mean, this actually brought a lot of things to my mind, but I was actually thinking kind of on this frame of thinking, you could also argue that the driving age should not be 16, but you should just make the test to pass way harder. Because there are some people at 16 who have no business driving a car, and there are some people who, like worked on a farm since they were 8 and could legitimately drive a car when they were 12 just on the farmland, and they would
Or
have been
or
fine.
even better, like people think, well, I can't drive until I'm 16, so why even try to practice until I'm 15? What
Yeah.
if you could get it at 10 or 12? I mean, and maybe there's a height issue, I don't know, but if people could think, well, I could get there faster if I had the ability to get there faster, they would start to get ready. They'd start to train. There'd be more driver's ed for 12-year-olds and those kind of things. And there'd be a like, man, you're a nightmare. Like your hand-eye coordination sucks. You can't read. You're really aggressive as a person. You know, we're revoking your license or not letting you have one. I think you let there be more of a selective process, but that could be anything. That could be ownership of just about anything that you could imagine. But it's the idea of, well, I have to wait until, like, I don't have to vote or I can't vote until I'm 18. Why care until I'm 18? No, you should be getting ready for that. Even if you can't vote at 13, you should start to think about things until you're there.
Yeah.
Now, I think that's one of the things of a mandatory 18. I sometimes wonder if it should be higher. But the idea that there's a mandatory reason because you've had some experience, you've had some education, you've lived life a little bit longer than a 12-year-old or a 17-year-old even, then voting makes more sense. But something like education, driving, I think the mandatory should be maybe fluid or lower.
Yeah, exactly. And then this, you kind of got into this a little bit when you said when it's not mandatory, it's total free market
Yeah.
for schools. What do you think the most important subjects are that people aren't learning? Because again, many people are going out into the real world and they're saying, "Why did I learn, 3 years of Shakespearean literature, but I never learned how to do my taxes or save for retirement or anything about finance at all? Why did I learn all these useless things when I could have been learning this in school?" And that's just kind of the view
Well,
of many people. And I also think there'd be a lot of people who would try a lot harder in school if it was around things that they actually cared about, like money, like these other things.
I think that's short-sighted. I think people should read Shakespeare. I think that should be a part of education. Now, because of it being very school choice, maybe there are schools who say, "I will only teach you how to make money." Okay, like that might be an option. But while you're making money, what kind of human being are you? I think the part of literature, great literature, especially the great books, is to help you become a good person. Is it pragmatically useless to study Shakespeare? Probably. But is everything pragmatic? Is it simply about attaining money or fame or wealth or status? No. Um, if all you want to do is make money, I think education is what, maybe 2 years total? I mean, and if we want to be maybe a little crass about it, if all you want to do is make money, just go into prostitution or porn. Like you can make money real quick in the short term. You don't have to know anything for that. Um, sell drugs, uh, do things that are really evil and you can make money really quickly. But I think studying Shakespeare, studying the great books, reading literature, reading nonfiction, studying science, studying math makes you a well rounded human being so that when you're not working, when you're at leisure. You're not simply let's make more money or I need to work harder. It's I need to work on myself. It's still that soul care idea that's far more valuable than simply having a function. Um, Now you talked about like doing your taxes and those kind of things. I guess the question is, should we be paying taxes? But that's another episode.
Yeah.
But how do you budget? How do you invest to make money? How do you save? I think those are worthwhile as well. I don't think education is only soul care. It has to be very practical too. The problem is when it's one or the other. Or when a student says, "Why do I have to know this?" Because you need to be an intelligent person. If you just want to, again, if you just want to know how to play the stock market, then take a weekend course and you're done. And you might be really successful, but who will you be as a wealthy person or a poor person? Who are you is a much more important question than what am I worth or like my financial wealth. But Shakespeare is a good one. Dostoevsky or Plato or heck even Hobbes or Rousseau. I mean people that you read them and there's not an ability to make money off of it. I mean, even a lot of those authors did not make money. They died in poverty usually, or they died in obscurity, or they only were known by a small group of people who kept reading them. But education is not simply about the function. Now, you have to be able to function. You have to learn some things. I mean, there was a time when people learned how to, like, home economics, how to sew and cook and all those things you needed. But of course, I guess a bigger question is why aren't those things taught by your parents? Um, Things like investment, why aren't you learning that from your parents? Like how they budget, how they run things, how they invest, how they make money, or how they make money. You're like, that's a terrible way to do it. I never want to do that. But to put all the onus on a school, I think is the first mistake. Even if you send your child to school, the parent is still responsible for educating their child. So if there's something you think your kid needs to learn that the school's not doing, okay, then you do it. Um, I mean, I guess it begs the question also, why do you have to go to school for all of it? Why not do your school like a la carte? Like, I'll teach my kid investment and Plato and literature. I'll send my kid to school to learn biology, right? Um, but that's more of a school choice, homeschool, co-op, like kind of system. But I think there is use for all of it, but we have to define use as not simply gets me money or gets me a better job or a bigger house. What can make me a more human person?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's all super valuable. But I kind of have been thinking about this and I want to answer it on a more direct because I think there has been enough science behind this where you could kind of actually make learning way better than it is right now. I think the first thing that I would do is I would actually front load language. The point of having high schoolers try and learn Spanish is
Oh,
pointless.
language, like learning a foreign language.
Yeah, like foreign language is literally utterly pointless in high school. Like the amount of kids who know any Spanish literally a year after they're done is like zero. It's
Well,
it's
and it's
near
in a
zero.
Prussian model of I only have to know Spanish for 70 minutes once a day.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think languages should be front loaded when you're young, and then like Spanish immersion, like you should be in that culture in that sense and like learning that language because that's when you can learn languages like nothing and actually remember it for the whole rest of your life. As well as I think it's super important that, well, again, going back to having people who want to be there and the intelligent people move forward and move forward quickly. I mean, you can see it in a lot of just like sci-fi novels where like when the hyper intelligent kids get pushed through fast, they can learn so much more so quickly, especially when they're young, because their brain is still expanding so rapidly. So I think getting it in a model where you're teaching math and even higher level math concepts, I think intelligent younger kids would be able to pick up and at least have the basis for the idea so they're not just learning kind of like you said one topic at a time.
Hmm.
If you just rushed them through, like I vividly remember when I was in first grade, we had to learn our multiplication tables and I learned it in one class period and it was like the entire semester. So the rest of the semester I'd spend time in like the desk you could open and close. I would set up bowling pins and then I would throw a bouncy ball on my desk and then I'd see how many I'd knock over. Just because it was like, do these tables. And then she'd give you a minute to try and solve all these multiplication tables. I'd finish it all and I'd turn it over the backside, start doodling, and then I'd just throw my bowling pin. So it was just a big waste
But,
of time.
but that goes back to the Prussian system of we have a like 50 kids or whatever, and that are learning this for this amount of time because that's what we're told to do. You can't move other people around. And when you do have a mass of students, let's say you have 50 kids, you do not move. You cannot move at the speed of the top 10%. You have to wait for the bottom 10% to move anywhere. So the people at the middle are kind of bored. The people at the top are insanely bored, and that's where you get what people are misdiagnosing often as ADHD, or they're distracted, they're bad kids, whatever. But that's the idea of, well, you can't go forward. You haven't done this time yet. Whereas something more like a Montessori method would be, here's the pathway. Let's say there's 50 stages. You have to show mastery of stage one before we let you into two. But you can move as fast as you wish. And there's a certain point where, like, okay, you're reaching a point where there's going to be more optional paths. But if it takes you a week and a half to get to stage two, then that's how long it takes you. You're not bound by what others are doing or what they're not doing. You're moving at your own pace. Um, that's a real value of that style of education, where you do have a classroom of kids, but each kid is more individualized, not simply differentiated. It's that individual kid has their own chart of how they're moving ahead, and they might really excel in, let's say, math and really struggle in reading, and that's okay. You don't have to move everybody in this big block, no matter how well or poorly they're doing. Like Charlotte Mason does something similar. Homeschool obviously is going to be like that. Micro schooling, those kind of things are going to allow, again, not just differentiation, where like in a class of 25 or 50, you've got like the A group, the B group, the C group. It's there are 50 specific learners, and you're not tailoring it. You're just allowing them to have their pathway.
Yeah, well, I guess in that case, you would kind of keep it. I'm actually, other than the languages, I would keep it basically the same, but then again, just I'd want it where kids who can go fast and just
Yeah.
blitz through it, and
But
are
okay,
in some ways
but
incentivized to do so.
there's something to be said though for, I mean, speed is good. If you can go faster, that's good. But I think blitzing might be the wrong image, because then it might be I can test really well. There's a point also understanding where you have to let things sink in. And so if you're blitzing through like 10 stages of things, that's great. Then have a point to say, now, how do all of those link up? And like it's called metacognition. I'm thinking about my thinking. What do you know about this in general now? What are we inferring? What are the general principles? How is it that addition lays the groundwork for long division? And thinking in broader terms and conceptualizing and drawing links, that I don't know if speed is the best way to get there, but even the more slower learners can get there. It might take more time. But I think getting through the stages, I don't think you're solving the problem of the Prussian system. It's just you're taking a Prussian system and saying, let's let some kids get through all the mechanical parts faster. Um, Speed is not the essence of education. And speed is not always an indicator of success. Again, there are some kids who test really well, or who can look like they're learning really well, who, when really pushed on understanding, are hollow. I mean, hollow. There are some kids who take a long time, but when they're pushed on it, they show understanding. I think if the Prussian system is wrong, which it is, then it's not simply speed. It's not simply like checking boxes. It's able to draw links and think holistically in webs and paradigms, not simply I can get through 1 to 100 faster than you can, or faster than anybody else can, because I can get 1 to 100 and not know anything. Or I see it as 100 individual isolated entities, not as a holistic web of ideas that form the paradigm of my worldview. It's everything. And that can stack as early as pre-K, but it's like asking how and why and what, not simply yes or no. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah,
that's not exactly right, but allowing depth and linking to happen, not simply task oriented.
yeah. I guess, well, for me, how I would do it is keeping it. I would actually keep the Prussian model, just like hybrided with the speed part, and like maybe add in that metacognition because I do think that would be good. But just for like the first sixth grades, because I think a lot of the stuff that you learn in first through sixth grade. First of all, I think a smart kid could learn all that you learn up to sixth grade in 1 year if they were actually challenged. Because
Mm, I don't
especially
know
at
if I
this
agree
point,
with you. Go ahead.
yeah, and I think once you got through like the foundational building blocks, which are just like long division, is just knowing how to do long division. There's not, I mean, you'll see how it links later, but at least until you get the basics, you really just have to build on that. But once you start getting to the point where you know the basic functions of life, I think that I would actually start. just I would actually start with finances because other than well, I guess you could start with like religion too. Religion and finance because if you understand those two
God and
things,
money. Okay.
if you understand those two things, you're going to understand the world basically because if you're following God and you're following the money, you're going to figure out where most things are located. So,
Uh, okay. I don't know
yeah.
if that's true, but
And then past that, I would actually make it where you could really pick. Like I would recommend some philosophy classes and stuff like that. But then truly, if you just wanted to go into the trades, I would just again set you free and just say go make money and use your knowledge of, religion and religion being the understanding of the good things and the most elemental parts of philosophy and society, and then I would just let them go because I mean getting ahead so early in life has such a huge financial benefit that I actually think it'll pay dividends in allowing them the time to actually care because you see that the people who care the most typically about the things in life unless they're the philosophers who are willing to die in poverty,
sure.
but like just in general in modern society the people who know the most about history, about just the world economics in general are the wealthiest people because they have the most time to actually think about it. Because it's just super important to have that time. And so I think if we were to set people free quicker, you would actually allow them to use the time value of money to then.
I don't know if you're right about that. I think I, don't, I think there are people who are wealthy who have the time to do those things. If they do, I don't. I think that's not accurate. I don't know. So Mortimer Adler, he used because he was one of the guys who designed the Great Books program for education. He was kind of a big deal in the classical school reimagining, I guess, or the resurrection of it all. But he used to do these seminars in Aspen for CEOs and business leaders and things, and he would have them read literature and talk about it in a seminar, much like we did in our philosophy class. And he found that these successful people who knew how to invest, who knew the value of money, really didn't understand much of anything else. Asking them basic things about what is goodness, what is truth, what is right, how do you know you're a good person, and they would get swamped by the fact that that kind of thinking is not money making, that kind of thinking is not immediate on a spreadsheet noticeable, and they didn't know how to do it. And he said there would be people who would come back year after year who he saw them grow, but the reason they came back is reading literature, Shakespeare, got them to think about things in a way they never had before because it wasn't profitable, it wasn't pragmatic. I think you're right that the wealthier a person is, the more time they do have to relax and have leisure in the right way. I don't think hard. I don't think many people do. I think with what you're talking about with education, we want to have the smart kids go faster, the Prussian system up to the sixth grade. I think what you're doing is ending up with something like a hierarchy caste, something like in Brave New World, where there's everybody is programmed. Some people are programmed faster or better than others. So you have alphas and betas at the top, but they're still a part of a mechanical process. You have the gammas and whatnot who are basically monkey people who, do manual labor. But I think in the system that you're talking about, you still don't have what you said earlier were free thinkers. You still don't have that because they're a product of regimentation. There's not a lot of choice. And by the time you give them choice, all they want to do is make money and be efficient. And reading something like Shakespeare is not efficient, not in a pragmatic way. I don't think the Prussian system or systems like it that are regimented, that are there to make drone people, I don't think I think it all depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to just be efficient, let's get some workers out there, even smart workers, then that's an efficient system. That's a good system if your goal is we just want to get everybody to click the boxes, now go make money. I think if you want to make human beings, that's the most corrupting thing you can do to them is make education a mechanical and assembly line type process.
Yeah, so I think maybe the problem I'm falling into is equating intelligent in the sense that you can learn fast to wisdom, meaning you're learning the things that matter well. And I think one interesting thing I am seeing is a lot of people, and this is kind of the reason I bring it up, is a lot of people in business are starting to realize, like for instance, the value of trust in business and how well that helps. And like the importance of goodness and helping people as they develop out of it. like the good side of wealth. Like the bad side of wealth always gets highlighted the most, the greedy corporation who dumps toxic waste into the oceans and kills everybody. But there's also the good side of wealth, which is the creation of goods and services that everybody uses, and then the people who use that wealth not to become more greedy but to have stronger families, to go learn. And I have seen a lot of those people. But yeah, there also would be those people, and I potentially the pitfall of what I was describing you could fall into is just you become really good at that one thing, and now that one thing being money, you just become hyper greedy, and that is becomes a problem.
Not even greedy. It's if your education is implicitly or explicitly saying, go make money, then that is taught or indoctrinated as the goal. And anything that is not a means to that end is useless. So you go take algebra. Well, I don't need to know algebra to have a lawn care business or to, invent the next social media platform. I don't have to know that. So why do I have to know this? This is not immediately or in the long run, I don't think, getting me money. Why do I have to learn the anatomy of a frog? Why do I have to read Shakespeare? Really, why do I have to do anything? What you end up with is like well, you need to know these 10 things, whatever, to make money. Now go do it. Well, that could be here's how you swing an anvil or swing a hammer onto an anvil, and that'll make you money. Okay, then education takes a weekend. I mean, if quickness is the point, then you will never make a lifelong learner, ever.
Yeah.
You'll make someone who is taught, well, I'm smart, I should go faster. I am capable, I should be able to get there faster. Other people will slow me down. Um, what's my immediate goal? At maybe any cost, I'll get there. And why would you expect a person who's just been taught their whole life make money to be responsible, to do things in a way that is not simply efficient but moral?
Well, I would say though the second part that I did add into that was the religion piece, and I do mean that like in that like that would be a huge part of it, because I think if you were to just say go make money, which in a sense public schools are doing that just like really inefficiently. Like go get
Yeah.
money, go be a factory worker. Like
Well, they'll get money, but it's to be a worker.
yeah,
It's to work, not to be an innovator, not
to
to
learn
be an owner.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so I guess the one half, the business half, would not just be business, because again, it's supply and demand. If you just created everybody to go be an accountant, then it's like, well, we're going to account really well, but we're not going to do anything else. So there would be different tracks. Like if you're interested in biology, similar to what college is in that sense, where you would learn hyper about this other thing. But then the religion side would be equally, if not, and it should be more important, because that would be the soul care side. That would be the side where, you would read the Bible, which is an epic in its own light, but then also other great works, or you could even call it religion slash like great works, so that way you would learn more about
But
that.
those things are not merely bumpers to keep you from crossing the line of too greedy.
Well,
That's
yeah,
that's frosting.
well, for sure.
That's the veneer. And but again, you're still
But even that
making
would be an
education all
improvement.
these little segments. Yeah, it would be. I mean, religion being, the bumpers over the gutters is better than having gutters, okay? But that's still not what the purpose of something like religion is, or philosophy for that matter, any of that. It's not meant to be that. So
I mean, and I don't want it to be either. I
But
want it to be
but
the
even
main
in your
focus.
model though, you're not allowing responsibility or freedom. You're saying, here's what you do, here's how you go do it and go do it. In the same way, here's how you assemble this engine on the assembly line to go do it. It's prepackaged. It's not freedom or choice, and it doesn't allow the individual to really go out and do things in a free market. They're prepackaged as they leave, which is the Prussian system. You're prepackaged, now go do it. Education in a more ancient or classical sense, you're not a predisposed anything. You're liberal, right? In the sense of you're free, you're more open. So a person with a truly liberal arts education could do any number of things. Again, we'll go back to Mortimer Adler. In his Paideia experiment, he says there should be no choices up through graduation. The only thing you might choose is your language, right? Latin or Spanish or Chinese or German, whatever. He recommended the ancient languages Latin, Greek, Hebrew, but we'll set that aside for a minute. He says so you're making thinkers, not workers, so that a person can say, I know how to learn. You tell me, or if I want to go be a lawn care specialist, I can learn that because I know how to learn. And I can go and figure out the laws around that, how to get a license, how to make a business plan. I can learn that because I know how to learn. Not I learned how to make a business plan, but I learned how to learn and think and express myself. So when I go and make a pitch to the bank that, hey, I want a loan for my business, I can write clearly, I can express myself and have a conversation effectively, whether I'm going to build a particle accelerator or run a lawn care business. I can think, I can express myself, and I can ask questions to understand the other guy. So, so let's say economics. The problem with some economics education is one, it's Keynesian, which is already a problem, but it's also, it focuses on the things that are immediately practical. Hey, we'll play a stock market game. Here's how to run a budget. Now, budgets are great and stock market's fun, but that's not economics. Economics is the study of how does an economy work? Big ideas. What is money? What can function as money? Why do we use money? What is value? How is value made? Once you get some of those first principles, let's go back to Aristotle, right? He is very first principle learning. If you understand what money is or what could function as money, all of a sudden a lot of other questions will fall into place like why is inflation bad? How do I make money? Well, I have to add value to something. I have to bring value. I can't just be like, I want more money. I think of all the people right now who are all angry because they're not making $100 an hour as a barista. They don't understand what money is. They think, well, I think I'm worth $100 an hour, therefore that's what I should be making. Regardless of whether or not I make a good, cup of coffee, regardless of whether or not I'm on my phone the whole shift, I'm not bringing that amount of value. I don't understand what value is. So something like economics education should not start with accounting or budgeting. It should start out with what is a demand? What is supply? What's an entrepreneur? How do we make that happen? What is bartering versus exchange? And you start to stack, right? So that when you get into things like the stock market, oh, I'm giving value to a company so they can make more value, make a product, and I get a piece of that. And things will fall into place. If you start out by saying accounting, we're going to go learn accounting. Okay, it's abstract. It doesn't mean anything. It's well, I did a function.
Yeah, and so I guess what you're saying, and I would agree with this, is you were saying start with the first principles,
Mhm.
which kind of like our previous episode, which is what is priority. The priority should be the thing that is first, and if you understand what is first, you can then figure out step 10. But if you start
Yeah.
with step 10, you not won't necessarily understand what is first, and that is what is missed in many modern day education systems.
So here's an example. Years ago, when you were a student of mine, we talked about critical race theory, right? Before we talked about critical race theory, we first said, what is critical theory? Just see that lens, right? We'll apply it to race, but what is it saying? And then when we got to race, we didn't just say racism. What's race? What is it? That's a slippery term. Where did it come from? Well, it used to mean humanity, and then Darwin and others like him, they got a hold of it and said, well, there's so many different looking people, there must be different races, because he was, he wanted to make the Western white European guys the most advanced and highly evolved. But if you get at what is critical theory and what is race, and not just in general, but how are these individuals looking at race? What do they call race? Versus what is a more
Yeah, and
historical
it's
definition.
definitional.
It's definitional. And that's, again, that goes back to Aristotle. The first act of the mind is understanding. What is this? Once you understand a thing, then you start having propositions. So you ask, I don't know, this is a dumb example, but you ask, what is an animal? And then you ask, okay, what is a mammal? And then you ask, okay, are all mammals animals, or only some of them, or none of them? Well, all mammals must be animals. If it's a mammal, it's also an animal, right? You start to build in this relational truth. You take two definitions and how do they relate? And then you start to add those propositions into syllogisms and arguments and you build forward. But that's where, like logic, I don't know if you need a whole year. I mean, it'd be nice to have a whole year for logic. But whether you do all propositional logic or you do classical logic or you start to bring in modal logic or you start to bring in informal logic as well, you start to, again, it's how are you thinking? Where if you understand logic, classical logic, you could learn just about anything just through conversation. Because you ask your questions like, well, what do you mean? I have seen too many people, people get absolutely derailed because they've never themselves thought what they mean. They're just using words. What do you mean by that? And they break down because they don't know. And you're not being mean about it. You're like, well, and if I don't know what you mean, we can't agree or disagree. What do you mean by this? Explain yourself. How are you using that word? That's a how to think education, not a what to think. So things like, okay, what's a mammal? Well, it's warm blooded, internal skeleton, spinal cord, fur or hair, gives birth to live young, and nurses its young. Okay, and then you think, are there exceptions? Well, what about the platypus? Uh-oh, a lot of marsupials are kind of odd that way, right? Are they mammals or are they like an exempted form of mammal? And then you start to ask about the exemptions. So you think so then you get into gender, right? What is gender? Is gender merely a cultural construct or is it a biological concrete reality? And that already you've either gotten yourself doxxed and canceled or you've started a line of thinking, right? And but that kind of education doesn't come with any sort of Prussian system. The Prussian system is not stop and think about it, it's just do. So, what do you mean? Is it true? So what? Right? Or how do you know this? Show me your evidence. And learning how to look at evidence. That's pretty rare.
Yeah, so I guess, again, the reason why maybe I personally don't hate the Prussian model is because it's in my nature to just ask what or why or how.
But where did you learn that?
I
Who taught
mean,
you to do that?
I'm sure it was my parents and my
Okay.
upbringing and I went to private school most of my life, but
Yes, you did.
I was told that when I was,
And I was your teacher, so I would
yeah,
have taught you if nobody else did.
yeah,
But all right, but stop, think about this. The Prussian model says just do. Your parents say ask why. Your school and your parents, at a Prussian, a truly public school education, are antithetical purposes. So you would grow up then in a very conflicted mindset. Just do, but ask why. But don't ask why, just do. Don't do, ask why. Now, but now you're in conflict. On some level, you're in conflict. You're not taught holistically. There's now two parts of you that are in tension, and that's a problem. So when you do homeschool or you put your kid in a school, you have to ask, will they be teaching a thing that aligns with me? Not simply is Jesus Christ Lord, but things like, are you teaching my kid to ask questions? Because at home I like them to ask questions. Or I want my kids to shut up and do it. Are you going to be doing the same? But that's all the level of education, not simply are you telling my kid that their gender is a
yeah,
construct. I mean that's so on surface level, but it's at the depth of it. Are you going to teach my kid to stop and think? Even if they don't agree with you, the teacher, are you at least going to get them to say, I don't know about this? What do you mean? There have been many times where I've had a student who does not agree with me, but in the back and forth of asking questions and forcing each other to clarify or make a better case, we both get better. Me as the teacher and them as a student, and we are both teaching each other. That's far more valuable than, is this on the test?
yeah. Okay,
I mean, think about that.
I see what you're saying. I guess how I would describe it is, and this is Prussian was, they were communists, so they want, or,
No, what
oh,
was it? Frederick was it Frederick the Great who did that because he wanted a more efficient
yeah,
system. It wasn't communist. It would have been more
like
authoritarian.
authoritarian. Yeah, that's the right
But
word. Sorry, but
I don't think he was a socialist, but he was. It was.
yeah,
If you're not an aristocrat, you're just. I'm being unfair to him. You're a pawn,
yeah.
and so I don't need you to be broad thinking and problem solving. Just I need to point you at something and you go do it.
Yeah, but I would say it more like this. I think there could be courses or school that teach you how, as long as you have a basic understanding to always ask why and
Hmm.
what.
I,
Because I think what you could have is, I guess, a system of a bunch of different courses that teach you, you know, how to do a certain task. But then also you would have a different area of your learning that would be ask or teaching you how to ask what and to ask why. And I think what we have right now, well, we don't even really have this now. or what we used to have, I guess, classic in like the 70s, is they teach you how to do stuff. Now they're telling you what to think.
Yes.
And I think that was the biggest problem when I think the biggest split between public and private education happened is when public education stopped teaching you what and they started to
Or the
or
why.
started the
Well, but
why they started teaching
that's
you what
why
to think.
the classical model is having this big resurgence in the last like 20 years. Because the classical system is built more or less on Aristotle's three acts of the mind, more or less, right? So you have understanding, propositional truth, like I need to have a discernment, and then I have to argue. So it usually happens in a typical classical model, which I wish that Legacy was a classical school. There are times I wish I worked at a classical school because I love that model, and as best I can, I like to bring it in. But in what we would call middle school, they're learning grammar, and I mean a lot. They're learning not just nouns and verbs, but things like participles and gerunds and sentence structure, and they're diagramming because they need to understand how the language works. They're taking it apart. They're they're reassembling it. They need to know in a sentence, is this a well written sentence? Is this the right use of the English language? They might also do some Latin or Greek. Is it the right use of Latin or Greek? Okay. Then they move into logic, where they're going to learn really it's classical or Aristotelian logic. They're going to learn definitions. They're going to learn propositions and how to make syllogisms, and then they're going to like learning that how to ask questions. Well, what do you mean? Is it true? So what? Or what's your evidence? Or prove your point? Or how did you get there? Okay. Then they're going to move into rhetoric, where it's going to be writing and speaking, debating, civil discourse, sharpening with each other, disagreeing, but not just I don't like that or you're a racist, but like explain how I'm wrong. Like you need to show me how I'm wrong, and if you're right, then I need to change. That's how the classical model is built. That's why more and more schools are moving toward the classical education model. A lot of homeschool co-ops are trying to get into the classical model because one, it's ancient tested, it's time tested for thousands of years. It's generated like thinkers. A great example, who's not obviously not the norm, but a good example is Ben Franklin. I mean, the guy went to school for a handful of years, but he was trained to think and was doing things like figuring out how lightning worked and magnets and printing presses and writing books, inventing spectacles. Like he just knew how to problem solve. Or guys like Tesla or Thomas Edison. I'm going to solve a problem. I'm going to start to tinker with things until I get it right. I'm not defeated by failure, or I see that as like, well, that's a failure, meaning that doesn't work. I'll try something else. You have people who are willing to sit down and like work it out on a piece of paper. You get thinkers who end up writing world-changing books who never really went to school. Like, and if they did go to school, they went to the kind of school that encouraged that. Let's think about this and let's argue it out, not what's on the test. Even people who might have been wrong, Hobbes, Nietzsche, they were taught to think and they let their minds run. Now, I don't think where Nietzsche or Hobbes ended up was where they should have ended up, as I think they ended up some weird places. But nobody told them to think that. Now, ironically, there are people who use Hobbes or Nietzsche or people like that and say you must think like that, which I think is they'd be real mad about. But to make thinkers, even people who are not geniuses, a person with moderate IQ can be a thinker. I've even seen it where people who have kind of a lower IQ are taught to think and ask, and they might take more time, and they might not have the grand ideas, but they can think.
Yeah, IQ is not. It's not a gauge on how good your ideas are. It's just how quickly you can pick up information.
Right.
So
But again, so Mortimer Adler, he's one of my heroes. He said he was interviewed by William F. Buckley on his old show Firing Line, and he said the problem is that people want to have everybody the same size cup. He goes, "There's
May I have your attention, please?
cut this out."
Will Carter,
not a big deal.
Carter Morrell, please come to the office. Carter Morrell, please
Start
come
over.
to the office.
You're good.
Thank you.
So Mortimer Adler had this idea when he was interviewed by William F. Buckley on Firing Line. He said the problem is that education wants all the kids to be the same size cup, when really some kids are a gallon, some a quart, some a pint, some a shot glass. The other problem is if you arrange students like that, the kids who get the gallons get like the really good liquid, like the really whole fresh milk, and the kids down here get skim milk. He goes, that's a problem. If you first make sure that there are some kids whose capacity are gallon size and some are shot size and a bunch in between, that's your first right move. Not every kid has the same IQ or abilities.
Oh, I
Whatever.
see what you're saying.
But then you make sure that the kid who's getting the gallon gets that good, healthy cream, raw milk, whatever it is, and so does the kid in the shot class. You fill them to the brim with quality. Not this kid's dumb, let's teach him how to retread tires. It's we're going to read Shakespeare. Now, it will be an uphill climb for the kid who's a shot glass, but we're going to fill you with quality. The kid who's a gallon, we could do more. But whether you have a lot of aptitude and intelligence and you have a high IQ, you're there, versus you really struggle. All right, we might not have you in the same class. We might not have you in the same grade level. But when I have you, I will give you the best quality I can give you, even if you're a shot glass or a gallon or everything in between. And I think that's what made him a premier thinker and philosopher and teacher, is that he understood not everyone's the same. Everyone, because we are human beings and desire to learn, need quality things to munch on. He said that oftentimes it's pushback that younger high school or middle school kids cannot wrestle with the great books. It's too much for them. He goes, you're right, and that's the point. All good literature should be over your head. He says it's like a puppy with a bone. That bone is too big for the puppy, and so it kind of wrestles with it and gnaws at it some. But that's the point. It gets stronger by messing with the bone that's too much for him. If you give that puppy only what it can handle, it will never grow. Not in its ability. But you give a freshman Othello, and you start wrestling with Othello, and it's going to be like, this is frustrating. Why do I have to use this? What's on the test? And it's going to be hard. But in wrestling with that book, that kid will get so much stronger and more able to think. They might not get every metaphor and nuance of the book, but then you take that same kid who struggled with Othello and you put him with something that's, I don't know, The Hunger Games, and they will destroy that book because they're used to wrestling with a really difficult thing. But if you only say, well, you're only able to handle The Hunger Games, that's all I'm ever going to give you. You can't get mad when that's all that they can ever do. You want to keep saying, yeah, this is bigger than you. This is harder than you. People have wrestled with this for longer than America has been a country. You will not be the end all and be all right now. You will join the great conversation, as Robert Hutchinson says, of Western civilization wrestling with the books that made the civilization.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of taking that analogy a different direction, but I think that you could also say with that shot class, it's really important that you teach them the most important things first, because they might not have the time, not even the ability, because I think with enough time, most people can figure most things out.
I agree.
But just more the time. And that's why it's all about, for me, the first part is all about speed, because if you can just keep filling something, you might as well just keep going with it. And then...
Yeah, but even the gallon has a limit.
Yeah.
There is a point where you have to stop and let it settle a little bit.
Yeah.
But I agree. If a person can do more, you let them do more. But and there has to be a give and take where the student has to demonstrate I could do more.
Yeah.
And the teacher has to have some kind of wisdom that says, yes, you can, or let's make sure. Let's pause for a minute to make sure you've got the fundamentals down or whatever it is. Because if you go too far, too fast, you'll
get top heavy and you won't actually understand things.
Right. And it's hard to back a person up when they're used to running to make them jog again, right? You want to build on a more firm foundation, but again, you're not giving the shot glass kid garbage.
Yeah.
You want to give them the best and with the time to wrestle.
But I guess what I'm saying is, so like the shot, let's say it's 1 ounce or whatever a shot glass is. I don't even know. But
okay, go ahead.
That's probably not. Anyways.
That's one of those it's a communion cup. That's I think that's an ounce.
Whatever. But let's say the first. Okay, we'll say 10 ounces.
10 ounces. Okay.
The first 10 ounces of liquid that's going in, or knowledge, is the same across the board, and it's for everyone the most important thing. And then the people who can do more are learning things that are still important, but maybe less important than the first thing. So that way, everybody has a basis of what is the most important, and then if you can learn more on top of it, you can. And so
it's not always one or two things. I think it still can be more holistic and balanced. It can't just be one thing.
Yeah.
But things like, again, with classical model, you're learning how to read, you're learning words, you're learning
Yeah.
grammar,
The
and
first thing for everyone is
it
reading. The
stacks.
first
Yeah,
thing for
of course, or
is math.
addition, or yeah.
Yeah.
And then there might be some things like how to save money.
Yeah.
And for little kids, it might not be like what's accounting, but like, okay, here's your $10. Put $1 in this jar, $1 in that jar, and put eight in this jar, and then you're learning kind of basic level. But you're right, like you want to have it more holistic, not so
Yeah.
center lane. Yeah.
No, and again, even with a model where it is, I guess Prussian's just the wrong word because it also just has such a bad connotation. I think school, at least at the beginning, should be a lot more how, just for the start, with the always intersected with asking why are we doing all of this? Because really just asking why is really the only thing you need to learn to be a thinker.
Well, there's more to it than that, but okay. I
I
mean,
mean, at its most base level, though, it's just asking why, what is this, and why does it
why
do
would be
this?
much later on than what is this and is it true? But
Yeah,
but why is it true? Why is that the definition?
yeah.
Kind of wraps it all back around. But there, it's always stacking. Again,
It's always
it's
based on
and
priority.
this is a missed word, but it's organic. It's like in an embryo. What is like what organ is there first? Well, there's not really one. It's all of them are growing concurrently. Some a little faster than others, but it's not you have a whole finished, heart and circulatory system, and then we'll make the lungs. It's sort of all at
Yeah.
once. So it's as long as it's network and it's holistic, then you don't get imbalanced. Because if you
Yeah.
have, a heart and circulatory system, but no lungs or brain then you're not going to live. Like it's got to
Or your
be
bicep analogy as well.
right. Like you want to have balance, and there might be times to focus on certain things, but not exclusively. You've got to have some flexibilities so that the human brain gets agile and flexible.
Yeah. Okay. And then the final thing that we're going to talk about today. So school choice and just the whole
One of
idea
my
of
favorites.
is how is this ever going to happen? Because right now we're not actually teaching kids anything because we're just babysitting them because we're teaching to the dumbest possible kid in the class who's causing all the disruption. He is the level that we are going to,
Or she,
or she, typically he.
sure. But we'll be fair.
Yeah.
So are you asking how do you get to school choice, or what is school choice, or what are you
Yeah.
asking?
So yeah, let's just talk about what is school choice? How would it enable at least some portion of what we just described to happen? And then why is it so much better than the
Well, it
current
just
public
is.
school model?
Okay, so on its bare bones, school choice is a family can choose to send their child to any school, even if it's outside their county or district. Minnesota or most states have a district system. If you live within a district and you want to go to the public school, you have to go within that district. You're limited in where you can go. Even if you live on the edge of a district and there's a better school on the other side, you're stuck in that district. That's the bare bones, right? School choice would be you can go anywhere. Usually concurrent or in parallel with school choice is something like vouchers or funding the student. Because right now, you pay your county taxes, and that goes to your district schools. And then the same schools will apply for state and federal aid, So, but what happens is the school does not have to make you happy. The consumer is not the one that they care about. It's doing things to get more state and federal money. It's also the same with unions, right? So I'm not going to say which this is, but I used to work at a school in their after school program, and they got more money from the federal government the more kids were in that program. I was the only man who worked there, so I was with the older and more rough kids at the school. And on my attendance list, I had like 50 kids. Only 8 would show up, so I'd mark them absent. My boss came in and said, "Hey, I'm going to change all them to being present." And I said, "Well, they weren't here." I'm like, "Yeah," and he said, "Yeah, but if they're present, we get more money." And I said, "That's fraud." And then the district eventually sent me a letter saying I was no longer employed at that school. So, but the idea is in school choice, the family can choose where to go, and the funding moves with the child, not in the district only. So usually it's something with vouchers, right? So here's sort of just a bare bones idea with school choice. In Minnesota, let's say, you could say you can take your child to any school in the state. most school choice advocates will say that the funding from the state, like taxes, stay within the state. All right, so fair enough. So any school in Minnesota. So on average, and I think my numbers might be a little bit dated, but in Minnesota, the state spends on average, I think it's 16,000 per student. That might be a little bit dated, but it's something like that. That's the most rural, most inner city average, about 16K per student per year. What school choice would say is, okay, rather than giving that money to the district or the school itself, why don't you take all and you change nothing with taxes, which let's leave that alone. But so taxes don't change. I have 4 school age kids. The state of Minnesota would cut me a check in, let's say, July. Here's $16,000 per student. Take your kid wherever you want to go. That could be to a public school, a private school, a charter school, a magnet school, a micro school, a homeschool co-op, anything. And you have to spend that money completely on education. That might be a tuition, that might be a laptop, that might be calculators or school clothes. And as a side note, everyone's like, what about fraud? Well, what if you buy Xboxes? Well, like with your taxes, you get audited. You have to show receipts. If they're like, hey, this speedboat had nothing to do with education, you're going to jail for fraud. Like, that's a felony. That's a big one, right? So you'd have everybody having 16,000 per student. Now, all schools, including the public school, would have to persuade you to spend your money at that school. The slogan is usually fund the students, not the school. So you have some horrible school, right? Some like McGowan Public School is totally trash, and the teachers are all hyper woke and whatever, and they don't really, they're lazy, and there's violence in the school, and drugs are rampant. All of a sudden, nobody wants to go there. Those teachers lose a job. That school gets shut down. Those administrators, those bureaucrats lose their job.
Yay.
Yay, I know, hooray for bureaucrats losing their job. But it's, but what happens is the schools that are doing what people seem to want. Now, that might not be the best of all education. There might be some high school that says all we do is football with some classes. But we're a football school, right?
Those still typically get funded nowadays.
True. But this way, some family might be, we want our kid to play football, period. Like we don't, yes, we have to meet some state standards about English and math, but we'll just be like, hey, you showed up and, spelled banana, English competency, let's go. Okay, if that's what you want to pay for, you can do that. Now, your kid will probably not be that intelligent, and even if they are naturally smart, they're not being fed anything, so they're going to be rather dumb and dull, probably rife with head injuries. I mean, that's your choice.
But really good at football.
They're great at football until their brain explodes, but true. So, but you can do that. There might be somebody who says, I want a LGBTQ plus 1619 project, critical theory school. Okay, you start that school. And if people want that for their kids, then they will spend their money there. The market will decide what people want or what's a good school, right? So there might be some that we're not doing any sports. It's all going to be college prep. It might be we're Spanish immersion. It might be any number of things. But anyway, the point is the schools that are meeting the needs of parents or meeting their wants even are getting funded. And those schools are all in competition with each other. Now, let's say there's a school that is like, yeah, we're $16,000 a year because that's what you have in your pocket. Another school who's down the road says, we can do the same thing for you for 14. That means you pay them 14 and you have 2,000 to buy school clothes or, trapper keepers or whatever else you're going to spend money
Or even
on.
put it in a 529 for college.
Sure, because school choice is usually K to 12. I don't know if that would also include colleges. You'd have to extend the voucher program. That's usually a separate issue.
But I'm saying, let's say you got 16,000 from the state, and schools are able to start doing it well for 14. You could put 2,000 a year into a college savings account, and that could solve our debt problem with colleges.
Maybe, although some voucher systems that people argue for operate more like FSAs, where at the end of the year you have to have it all spent.
Yeah, that's horrible. And
True. But I'm saying
stupid.
The college system might be a little bit different. Usually, the voucher school choice is pre-K to 12. So let's stay there.
No, what I'm saying is it should stay pre-K through 12.
Oh.
I'm just saying
it
shouldn't
should be used for college. Yes, I'm with you. But normally, school choice advocates don't go that far.
Yeah, because
there's a lot more choice in colleges. There's a lot more choices.
Yeah, they also know that the government is big on FSAs. If we can blow money by the end of this year, you should blow the money.
But back to the point though. So you've got 2 grand to spend by the end of the year, whatever, on education. So you buy your kid the new MacBook Pro or cool shoes or whatever. That's education, right? For school. Now, imagine, if you will, that I've got 4 kids and we homeschool all 4. What could I do? What could we do for 16,000 per kid in a school year? Homeschool.
You can do a lot of stuff.
Hey, we're going to Washington D.C. to study U.S. history for a month, right? We're gonna like go and learn experientially. So what would happen over long term is schools in competition would have to increase their quality, have more variety, and lower prices. All of a sudden, all these families have all this extra money all the time, and the state of Minnesota is like, well, gosh, you're putting it in colleges. We don't like you having all this extra money because of government. All of a sudden, they lower taxes because you don't need that much money per student because no school is 16,000 anymore. In long term, school choice would lower taxes. Another amazing benefit is school choice would absolutely gut the union.
Yeah.
Yay, I'm all for it because okay, so you hire all your union teachers, or the teachers go on strike, or work to rule, or whatever. Okay, I'm pulling out my kid. I'll go to the school that doesn't do that. All of a sudden, teachers have to actually be really good, and teachers who are like mediocre to bad, who are just kind of like waiting out their pension, all of a sudden they find themselves like, you're the reason nobody's spending their money here. You're fired because if we fire you, the rest of us have a job. That's great.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you have to hire quality teachers and you have to do things like, oh, you're like hyper woke, you'll ruin us. No thank you. Not, well, you click the boxes for all of our tokens that the unions require. Mm-mm.
Yep.
It's quality. So over time, school choice would increase quality across the board, increase safety, increase the quality of even things like athletics and all extra things. It would cater to the needs of families better. You'd have, especially inner city education, which is stereotypically not great. You would have the ability to move out. You'd have the ability for more quality schools to come in. You would have a better amount or a better quality of teacher. You'd have more of a variety of school options: big school, little school, college prep, the football school, everything in between. And over a long period of time, you would lower taxes. Now, the only group that does not like school choice is teachers union and bad teachers. I guess, and politicians who the teachers union like props up. But you talk to anybody about this, and they're like, "Why aren't we doing this right this minute?" A buddy of mine, we were driving back from Tennessee for a church thing, and I was just like I was talking to him, and I just said, "Hey, what do you know about school choice?" He goes, "I know nothing about that." And I took a couple hours to break it down, and he's like, "This is unreal. Why aren't we doing this right now?" And he says, "Well, my sister is a public school teacher. I'll ask her." He came back and said, she got mad at me. Like, how dare I even bring this up? Because teachers are going to lose their jobs and schools will shut down. And it got me thinking, well, yeah, that's right. A lot of teachers who shouldn't be in the profession would be gone. A lot of schools that are unnecessary would be gone. Or the schools that are terrible would shut down. What about those empty buildings? Somebody else would come in and have a better school. You know about for the kids who want to do nothing but trades, do a trade high school. You could do that.
You could learn all of the trades in high school.
You could be just a general contractor by the end of it.
Yeah.
Or you say, hey, we're only going to do, the fine arts. And there would be some basic requirements from the state, maybe, for like, and like if you want to go to the U of M, they say, well, here's what you have to be admitted. Fair enough. But variety is always better than monotony, right? But school choice allows that. Other states have done it. I think it's up in like 25 or so states have it.
Or at some level. Some have
Some
done it
level.
more extreme than others, but yeah.
But even if you say, let's compromise with more left-leaning people, let's not change the taxes. Same taxes. But whatever the taxes are, you have a student who is what, 3, I think is the earliest you go to pre-K to 18. Here's your check for $16,000. And use it as you will. If you want to send your kid to, I don't know, Duluth, all right, go for it.
Yeah.
You have to get out there. Or imagine like how your family was so far away. You could make the case that gas is a part of your education.
It is.
Imagine if you were funded, especially now with gas being like, if your gas driving an hour every day is funded.
Yeah, I mean, we were spending like 7K on
On
gas.
wear and tear on your car, even.
Yeah. And even like crazier than that, it's just like you could literally like you would just revolutionize everything. There would be online courses, there would be like the whole like people would just get way more intelligent just in general.
And even better, right? Yes, you'd have more intelligence, but you'd also have safer schools. So let's say it's you. Let's say you're kind of just a bad kid. You're kind of rough. You're kind of violent. You're rude. You're disrespectful. You are a bully. Nobody likes you and you're mean. You're gone because you're costing us money. You don't have to be here
Yeah.
because you're here. 10 other people don't want to be here. You're costing us, $60,000. It's time for you to be like, you're gone. And other schools are like, yeah, that Delfin kid, he's he's
It's
he's
not good.
toxic. He's poison. Okay, but somebody would say, hey, I'll start a school for troubled youth. Somebody who's a retired, I don't know, Marine drill sergeant. Great. God bless him because honestly, those work for a lot of kids. Hey, you know what? I'm going to start a military school. Please do. We will funnel you kids. And it's not like you have to fundraise. It's for every kid. There's $16,000 behind that kid.
Yeah. Well, and actually, it would actually solve another interesting problem that we're having is right now we're having a declining population, or at least it looks like it. It would probably solve that problem because having kids would become so much less expensive because it would basically a $16,000 stipend to just raise your child. And for a lot of people, that would make a huge difference rather than just sending them to.
And this is where, and I know I'm kind of a hypocrite here. This is where you could legitimately have a kind of bureaucrat, and let me caveat, like kind of bureaucrat, who would say things like, okay, Mr. McGowan, you have 4 kids, we're giving you this much money, just audit you real quick. What are you doing with that money? What school are they in? Because there are some people who'd be like, I'll have 9 kids and I'll take all that money and I'll go,
Yeah.
I'll travel. But it's a felony. Fraud's a felony. Or like when a business, person, if they expense everything that has nothing to do with business and they get audited, they're in trouble. They get fined. They might even get jail time if it's really egregious. But you'd have a kind of auditor, like at least show at the end of the year, like doing your taxes. Here's form 8973-9, whatever. Here's how you expensed your education. Like whatever a W-2 would be for that. Like you got this much money, show your receipts, you turn that in. And I would hope it would roll over. Like if I only use like $8,000, I get the eight.
Yeah.
I hold on to it.
Or you can put in a 529.
Right,
Yeah.
or your college thing or whatever. But I think that would, if that was an option, I think this is why it should be an option. Is people who are forward thinking would start to do that.
Yeah.
I can homeschool my kid for $7,000 a year and just dump the rest of that. And you would think that colleges would get really behind that.
Yeah.
More kids have more money to spend at college? Well, heck yes.
Yeah.
And they're smarter
Yeah.
and they're more capable. You don't have to have 8th grade English as a freshman class in college. Why are you not for this college? And even the colleges would have to follow suit. All of a sudden, it's like, well, now we can be more selective.
Yeah.
We don't want a 2.0 for GPA admissions, and now it's a 3.8 because there's so many more bright kids out there.
And
But
just what it means to have a 3.8 would change.
Oh
Just
my
having
gosh,
a
yes.
3.8 in the modern day isn't hard.
No.
It's not. It's
Well, and this is a whole other topic, but a weighted GPA makes more sense. But school choice, when you give human beings choice, when there's real competition, things get better and less expensive at the same time. You have a bureaucracy. Everything is heavily bloated with a lot of top heavy and mid heavy bureaucracy. You get a lot of mediocrity. You get a lot of unhappy people who have no recourse. I mean, you would never have these like videos of school board meetings where parents are having to read the most egregiously gross stuff. Like this is in my 3rd grade class. You would just say, "Oh, you're doing that to my kid? Bye. I'm taking my money with me." And there'd be this mass exodus, and
there already is even without it.
but there'd be an immediate
Yeah.
financial cost where, hey, we just lost 100 families.
Yeah.
We have to lay off half of our staff today, and it would be like it would be this. There will be an immediate consequence for every move we make. We're gonna get rid of soccer. Some people would leave and some would stay.
Yeah.
Every decision now is based on supply, demand, profit, loss, competition, capitalism. Not we have the most woke message, so we get more state money and piss everybody off. Well, we get money anyway. No, there'd be an immediate reaction.
That's true because right now they're having students leave to like en masse. Like it is crazy the amount of homeschoolers. I can't remember the exact numbers, but I know.
It's crazy huge. There are so many new co-ops that are popping up. I have a friend in White Bear who they were telling me something like a year ago. Their district had so many families leave that just their numbers dropped so far. The state and the Fed gave them less money, and they had to lay off a bunch of teachers. But it takes that level of exodus to even have imagine if that was an
fraction.
immediate you've lost
Yeah,
that much, like if legacy, like we depend on tuition. If a third of our families left, it would be devastating, and it would be felt in a week.
yeah.
Not, well, the next time we apply for grant money, it's no, well, Mr. McGowan, we don't have the money for you, you're fired, like we're laying you off. And it wouldn't be the end of the year, it'd be the end of the day. Our budget's so out of whack now, we're cutting programs, it would be immediate. But that's why when people would make a decision, hey, we're going to have, I don't know, drag queen story hour, somebody would say, what will the cost be?
Yeah.
Not, well, we check a box, we'll get more money. It's how many of our families are going to immediately pull their funding and leave. Do we want to be woke or do you want to have a job? Pick one. And that's the kind of thinking that across the United States, educators have not had to think through. School boards have not had to think through because there was nobody you had to please except the government. I mean, imagine how, like that in principle, I only have to please the government. Things will never go well with that.
And
Ever.
it would be great too if colleges could kind of do similar things because I've had some pretty crazy college professors who you can tell don't really care because they're just in the system and you can't get them out no matter how hard you try.
There's value of tenure, so you're not like you can espouse views that are like challenging and not immediately be fired. Like there's value at that level of tenure, I think. But
Sometimes.
sometimes, but I think if it's you're only tenuring a certain ideology, that's a problem.
But not even that. I just think sometimes tenure, it's they also just get lazy too. Like, oh, you don't want to skip class day because I remember you said it's the only profession where having class be missed is celebrated.
Hmm.
Me not showing up for my job is celebrated
Hmm.
because that means I don't have to show up, and I think that happens a lot of times. Or professors at like big universities will have their TA teach and they will never show up, and so
But there's a value in that as well to some extent, where you're allowing a TA or RA to get some experience. I think there again, there's value. If you end up like I'm going to play the system, I think with any system, you play the
I
system
think
for
there's
your
a
own
lot of people playing
selfishness.
the system.
Yes, but so I mean that's a whole nother thing. But if you keep it from pre-K to 12, you you end up with a lot of possibility.
Yeah.
If you get a population of people who are like, we want more trade school education, like if that happened here, we would just start forming partnerships with Anoka Tech or wherever else. Like we're going to start to to make all of you happy and keep spending your money here. We'll have some opportunities. But if we had that and nobody wanted it, we'd stop, right? If nobody wanted basketball, that whole thing would
That would
die.
be great.
It would be great, but it's there, and in a consumer-based market, if people want basketball, you have to give it to them. I mean that's just the way it is. I might not like it, but somebody does, and those people paying money feeds my kids. So hey, go play. But this goes back to again choice responsibility. If I want to be responsible for my own children's education, and again, as you put it, what I think is a smart way to put it, it's a stipend to raise your kids. What if I said, all right, I'll send them to private school? And the like maybe some elite level private schools would be like, we're still 30,000 a year, but the stipend will get you halfway, right? Because there'll be some who will be like, we're just worth that much. Some schools would say we want to maximize our potential. All right, it's 15,000 a year or 16, whatever, and we can keep on growing.
Yeah.
And I think again that's forward thinking, that's far thinking. It's not right here. It's we want to educate kids, we want to help them to grow and to be intelligent, good citizens, good people, well rounded, and we don't want this to be a private school to be a barrier to you. I mean that's one of the things that is
Yeah.
always a problem. Well, that's private school. It's so expensive. Why? It doesn't have to be. The people who are invested in keeping their jobs, who are terrible at their jobs, will keep that from you, will not allow you to have that option. What if Minnesota had school choice? The unions are pretty much dead.
Yeah.
Then teachers would have to change. I mean, I think a bigger meta question of all this is you want a good education system, you got to have good teachers. But how do you make good teachers? You train them to be thinkers, not here's how you use a textbook.
And I would even say, how do you get good teachers? You force them to actually have to compete for their jobs on some level. And teachers will always make the argument, well, how do you, demonstrate that you're a good teacher? Well, everybody knows Mr. McGowan's a good teacher, and people legitimately come or stay for his teaching. Why is that? Because people just know that he's actually teaching you stuff versus other teachers,
Well, thank
people
you.
know that they stink, and it's not based on test scores.
I didn't ask him to say that, by the way. He said that of his own free will.
Yeah.
But and thank you for that. But I think it's, if again, back to school choice, if you want the best possible teachers because you want the most students who are bringing that money with them, you're not simply I want a body or a person who's adequate. You're always, I think you're not wrong in forcing them to compete for their jobs. I think there is some value of saying, like here at Legacy Now, at the end of every year, we get evaluated and we are either offered or not offered a contract for next year. That's valuable. I don't know if it should be every quarter or semester, but the idea of like you're not hitting certain targets, bye.
Yeah.
I think that kind of fear, I don't know the right word, is a motivator. But I don't think the best teachers are motivated by fear. I think the ones who are the best are motivated by I want to learn. Now those are not as common as the others who just know how to use a teacher's edition, but you want to make sure the kind of people you have are dynamic enough to take something and wrestle with it with a kid, not simply what's on the test. I mean,
Yeah.
if your educators are taught to teach to the test or teach to the worksheet or whatever, that's all you're going to get. It's sort of like a business with capital, right? If you're going to run a coffee shop, you don't want the Mr. Coffee maker. You want the like super high tech, awesome espresso machine that has like 15 functions. Because the better quality capital you have, the better product you have. But you also need the better baristas who know how to work that machine. So you want the best educational setups. You also want the people who bring the right human capital. Not simply I can use a teacher's edition and follow the thing that is pre-written, but if need be, I could do it myself. That I am learning and I'm modeling that for my kids as often as I can from pre-K up. I'm learning. I learned a new thing, and you're learning too. I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but I just have more experience than you.
But that's true of anything. Anytime you love something,
Agreed.
you're going to be better at it. But again, I think that would, I mean, yes, there would always be places. I mean, just like there's bad workplaces now, there's always be places where, people are scared they're going to lose their jobs. But, eventually, as things played out, there would be schools that people would just like, and teachers would enjoy working there, and students would enjoy going there, and it would just become a better thing because that's how the free market works.
And at the end of the day, you should, at any job, be good enough to where your employer thinks, what is the cost of keeping you? What is the cost of losing you?
Yeah.
And the cost of losing you should be worth the cost of keeping you, right?
Yeah.
Like, I
That's
might
usually how
not,
it goes.
I mean, I appreciate what you said, but I know there are times I push things a little hard and people get a little upset. There is occasionally, or more often than not, a cost to keep me here. Like, especially in meetings or things, I tend to push things a little hard. But what would be the cost of losing me? Versus if I was some horrible, lackluster, lazy teacher who makes everybody angry all the time, who's not a good teacher and everybody is frustrated, there's a cost of keeping me here. The cost of keeping me here is worth the cost of losing me. So there you go.
There
I
you
mean,
stay.
you can flip it as what's the benefit of keeping, the benefit of leaving. But I think the competition side of it is there a cost to keep anybody? Always money, something like personality conflicts, whatever.
Yeah,
But
reputation.
is there a cost of losing you? I mean, and I don't think it's arrogant to say, but I think over the years I've ingratiated myself here at Legacy to say things like, if I did leave for whatever reason, it would not be easy to replace me. And
And parents would say something.
well, but I mean, maybe, but some might cheer. Who knows? But the idea is, in any business, whether you're laying sod or you're building particle accelerators or you're going to the moon, there's always a cost of keeping you around, money or personality or something that should never be bigger or worse than the cost of losing you. Um, but especially with educators, I don't know many who have faced that reality. Most teachers I know have this idea of like, yeah, but I'm a teacher. This is different. Like we can be lazy or miss things, and there's no penalty here, or the union will fight for me. Think about that. Like, what does that say? That if the administration of the school board had its way, you'd be gone. But this non-education entity will swoop in with all the fury that it can muster to keep you in your job when nobody wants you there, or very few want you there.
Yeah.
I mean, just imagine that. Like, what would that say about you in any job if they wanted to fire you? There was every reason to fire you. They could, but some other outside entity forces them not to.
Yeah. I mean, that's just a classic. I think unions are just a group of people. There's a quote that I will eventually read the full thing on the podcast, but it basically talks about how there's four types of people. Hard, four traits that people could have. It's two binary. So you could either be hardworking or lazy, and then stupid or smart. And basically, there's four different qualifications for a military.
Yeah,
For
yeah,
those
yeah. What's that guy's name?
Carl von something or other.
Von Schurter. Yeah, yeah. But he says the people who are smart and lazy are the ones you want in the highest
Yep.
positions. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then the people who are the worst are the people who are stupid and hardworking. That is basically what unions are to the T because they don't. I mean, and stupid and lazy and stupid and hardworking. So either
Yeah.
way, but it just collects the worst of
But-
all people
Well, and like you say, like
because it's a fallback.
it is a fallback, and we want as many people as possible there to be in the union because the bigger the union, the more strength it has.
Exactly.
But it's, well, you'll sacrifice quality for quantity, as every
Yeah.
union must. Even the unions that do a good job at what they do, like the ones who do elevate the quality, the ones who do, like, certain trades have it makes sense to some degree to have a union, maybe. You always will have to sacrifice quality over quantity of people in the union. You must. The minority that works really hard and makes the union look good is overworked to keep those who are really not great at their job in, because a small union is not powerful. So you want to have the biggest one possible, and that means you take the good and the bad.
Because a union is simply a monopoly of labor.
True. And it's a monopoly of labor that doesn't really invest in the labor, it invests in the union.
Yep.
Um,
Invest in the lawyers who
well,
run the union.
yeah, and as much as they try to help, like, workers have rights and all, but it's like Steve Martin said, I mean, be so good they can't ignore you. I mean, a person who's an excellent, I don't know, cabinet maker has no need for a union.
Yeah.
A good teacher has no need of the union. A good nurse
Anything.
has no need of the union. It's
In fact, the union actually holds them back.
I think so, much like education, that those who could excel can't. Those who should have been removed naturally are stuck in, and the ones that work hard have to compensate for all those who don't.
Yeah, and what's funny is there would actually eventually be teachers who would get paid like multiple six figures for like those extreme preppy schools that
Oh, yeah.
have just jacked prices up because we are the best. There would be teachers who would start getting paid because they would be known. I mean, in a sense, it's like the Jordan Petersons of the world would get found, but they're just high school teachers. And then they would get paid because a lot of people would pay a lot of money to have certain people as their teachers. And so they would then get paid as as such because it's a
It'd be
free
nice.
market.
It would be nice. But all that to say is, when there is freedom, when there is choice, even if there's no vouchers, because there is choice, you'll always get higher quality and lower prices. Whether that be as a student or as a teacher or as a business, as a trades worker, as a whatever. And I think long term, you would see the benefit of more of that classical liberal arts education because it would make a person overall a better human being and a better citizen, a better worker, a better owner, and more responsible. I think you would still have the same amount of workers. The workers would not be so easily duped as the massive citizenry.
Yeah. Well, and I guess kind of the final thing that I want to say as often as I can on this podcast is with more freedom comes more responsibility. Everyone who's trying to poke holes in this argument, they're basically just going to say like the parents would abuse it. They would do this, kids would suffer. It's like they might, but it's only if the parents abused this
But
new
even if
freedom.
they do, even if they do, somebody possibly abusing a thing does not mean the thing should be outright banned. Because that could be anything. People might abuse having shoes. Does that mean that no one should have shoes? I mean, the thing, right? Well, somebody might abuse having a firearm. That does not mean that no one should. There are people who abuse cars. There are people who abuse, coffee. There are people like it was it in New York. They banned like large sodas. There are people who abuse having sodas. Let's just ban them. I mean that's such a government response
Yep.
because freedom means you have the ability to make a bad choice.
Yep.
Bad
Exactly.
choices do not eliminate freedom. They show that to be able to make a bad choice, I also have the ability to make a good choice. I am either praiseworthy or blameworthy. I'm not a robot who's programmed and dictated to by a bureaucrat. It's just so dumb because it's things like there are people who abuse their bureaucratic power. Should we ban all bureaucrats? I mean,
Yes.
yes, but but you have to turn it around on them. There are people who abuse, I don't know, computers or clothing or oxygen or just that principle doesn't hold. When you apply it to everything, it's shown to be absurd, or you apply it to the people who are making that argument. Okay, then everything's banned. Everything's banned except for government. But of course, are the people who abuse the government?
Government's never been abused
Never,
once.
ever, never. So
We need more of it,
we
actually.
a whole lot more. In fact, absolute. But again, can a person abuse power? Then let's ban power.
Yeah.
That's irrelevant. That's a contradiction because you have to have the power to abolish all power, which means you don't have the power to abolish power, and it's.
Yeah.
But that's why you educate to be a thinker. So
Yeah, exactly. And so, anyways, again, freedom and responsibility. We want to build a responsible people so that way we can be free. All right. Thanks so much for listening, and we will see you again next week.